The Empath, an episode of the original Star Trek that I didn't even remember existed until I watched the promo in the last review. The Empath is from Season 3 of the original series, the swan song of the series, filled with just some of the stinkiest episodes of the entire show. Some of them are so bad it's good, like Spock's Brain, but overall, Season 3 is pretty disappointing. Season 3, if I'm not mistaken, was also the first time that Gene Roddenberry was kind of wrestled away from the show, like it was wrestled out of his control. So some fans just hate this season entirely on principle. I'm not one of them. I think there are some fine enough episodes here, and I think some of them are interesting enough on an intellectual level that they're worth talking about. And again, Spock's Brain is hilarious. But I'll admit, this isn't one I revisit very often, hence I didn't remember that this episode existed until I watched the promo in the previous review. And rewatching the episode for this review, because I had seen it before, I've seen every episode, I just didn't remember seeing it. It's not like it's awful, spoilers for the rest of this video, it's not awful, I don't hate it. Like I looked it up a little bit, some fans hate this episode, I don't hate it, but it's not great either. It's like a perfectly watchable episode of this show, but it's not remarkable really in any way. And the main reason why I think will become pretty obvious to anyone who knows Star Trek well, at least, as I talk about the episode itself. The plot of this one being that the Enterprise comes to a star system doomed to soon be destroyed by a supernova, because on an uninhabited planet in the system, there are inhabited planets in the system, and no one is trying to save any of these people because the frickin' Prime Directive probably, and I hate it. But that's beside the point. Not going to talk about that again. On an uninhabited planet in the system, a couple of Starfleet researchers set up a base so that they could observe the star as it starts to go nova and try to learn science from it. But now it's time to head out to their treehouse and tell the boys to come home. So the Enterprise comes to retrieve them, only to find that they're missing. And so when, of course, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, the three most important officers on the ship, go down to the planet to try and find them, they watch a tape, like a surveillance tape, of the guys on the last day they were there, and find that they succumbed to a terrible noise and then just magicked away. Only for the same noise to start to come through without the tape playing, and then for Spock and McCoy to get magicked away, and then for Kirk to also get magicked away after Shatner gets to overact a little bit. Meanwhile, the Enterprise has had to leave orbit for a while, so they can't help, because the soon-to-go nova sun has been throwing off solar flares that, while a planet's atmosphere would protect the people on it, the ship is in danger. So they have to leave until that stops. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy find themselves in an unfinished set where a young woman lies on a big comfy couch in the middle of a big black void. And they try to talk to her, but end up only talking at and about her because it turns out she's mute. Even though she's otherwise completely humanoid, her species seemingly never developed vocal cords. And when wondering how then she communicates and how they could even communicate with her, since a species that didn't evolve vocal cords wouldn't have evolved language, like spoken language, so their translator wouldn't be doing anything. They realize that she's not telepathic, but she is psychically empathic. She can feel their emotions and even heal their injuries, though she has to take them on herself momentarily to do that. So, like, theoretically serious enough injuries could kill her, right? So, seemingly her people communicate through emotional impulses. So even if it doesn't seem like she can understand them, and she might not yet because their emotions are foreign to her, she can understand them. It's just they can't really understand her back. And at first they think that maybe she might be behind all this, but then these guys come in who are definitely not the Telosians from the Cage/the Menagerie, with just slightly different head makeup. And the not Telosians, they have these little handheld devices instead of illusion powers that let them do basically whatever the plot needs them to do. And it's clear that they're the ringmasters here, but after just some light taunting, they leave, allowing our heroes and this young woman who they've decided to call Jem since they can't ask her name, to wander around the unfinished set and find tubes in which the corpses of the two scientists are displayed in poses of shock and horror. And I think this scene is really dumb. Like, the scene that preceded it between our heroes and the young woman Jem had her use her healing ability to heal a minor wound on Kirk. I probably put the clip in the review already. And it's not a bad scene, right? You can see that she cares enough about this stranger to help him with this minor thing that she's capable of helping him with. Like, I mentioned that serious enough injuries might risk her life in that moment that she takes them on, but even something like this is a physiological ability. So even something like this would take energy and effort for her to pull off. It's not like she's taking on a little head boo-boo for just a second and that goes away 100% forever. So she is making a bit of a sacrifice there for him. It's not like she's a bad person. And I kind of get what they're going for with the character of Jem being mute. They want to convey this silent kind of strength through her. And the actress does an okay job of that. And I'll talk about this more either as the review goes on or at the end. I haven't decided yet. I'm working from my notes as usual, right? But the actress is capable of that from time to time. It's just this scene where they're just wandering around this big black void with a few things scattered around it. Like, they take her with them, but they don't use this opportunity to learn anything about the character or to allow us to learn anything about the character through them, because she can't talk. They can't communicate with her. The only time any indication of communication happens between these characters is when we see her facial expressions as she's doing her empathy thing on them. Even when they find the scientists, while Kirk's initial reaction to them is pretty strong, Kirk, Spock, and Bones don't really react that strongly after that, and she has no reaction whatsoever, so we don't learn anything from that either. It just... This scene feels like it's here as filler and nothing else. Nothing is accomplished in it except the plot is furthered, technically speaking. Like, we could have jumped directly to the next part of the plot. We didn't have to be here. We didn't have to do this. But technically it does further the plot as it's written. Because this brings us to the Not Telosian's Dick with Our Heroes section of the episode, where one of the guys teleports in and allows Kirk, Spock, and Bones to think that they have escaped, only for them to show up outside as they're running around outside on the same rocky planet set from every single episode, where they catch Kirk in some kind of slow-mo beam or something, letting Shatner hilariously overact. It's just glorious. Then they tell Kirk that they only need him for their experiments, and Spock and Bones and the girl can leave, only to, like, 10 seconds later, just zap all of them back inside. What was the point of that, if not to just kill, like, 30 seconds of airtime? Like, I guess there's a cool reaction from Kirk, where we see how mad he gets that they didn't keep their promise and let his two friends leave. Maybe that was the point, but there's a lot of that in this episode. A lot of the Kirk, Spock, McCoy dynamic. I don't think that we needed this additional scene of these guys just yanking our heroes' chains like this. But this does culminate in Kirk being taken away to be tortured after he takes his shirt off, of course. And I know what you're going to say. AJ, they just took his shirt off before they strung him up so they could, like, get better readings or something as they were putting him through whatever they're doing to him. But no. Like, it's not exactly the same torture, mind you, but we do see them string up McCoy later to be tortured, and they don't take his shirt off. That means that Kirk did this himself, and that's hilarious. It's like that Alan Rickman line from Galaxy Quest. I see you managed to get your shirt off. And granted, while it does suck that Kirk got tortured, this does lead to the good part of the episode, the best part of the episode. He's teleported back to the room with the big comfy couch, and he's effectively been subjected to some induced form of the bends, which was a cool condition for them to bring up. Like, I don't know what hat they pulled that out of, but it's neat. It's something. It's more than just like generic trauma or something. And again, Jem uses her powers to heal him, at least most of the way. He's still pretty worn out, but she manages to heal him at least most of the way, even though this is way worse than that cut on his head from before, and she almost can't bring herself to do it. Her self-preservation instinct is almost too strong. And Bones even points this out. This is when they start talking about what would happen if she tried to heal mortal wounds, and he says that it might kill her, but that her self-preservation instinct would likely stop her before she got to that point. And this is fine. This is good. The actress, again, does a good job acting with just her facial expressions. But what's really great here is when the Not-Telosians show up again and say that one of the other two will be taken next, and that the next torture sesh, I guess, for lack of a better term, will kill a human, but a Vulcan will definitely survive. He just may be driven insane by it. And they're going to let them choose who goes next. And since Kirk's already been put through the ringer, it's got to be Bones or Spock. And the two of them start arguing over which one of them gets to sacrifice for the other. Spock, being logical, thinks that he should go, since that means they will all still be alive when it's done. But Bones, despite all the shit he gives to Spock all the time, cares about Spock enough that he's willing to die for Spock's sanity. Meanwhile, Kirk is wobbling around, telling them, nope, you don't get to decide, stop arguing, I'll make the choice when the time comes. But Bones, realizing he's still not in great shape, hits him with a tranquilizer, because the Not-Telosians apparently let them keep their tranquilizers for some reason, so that he can start to sleep off the last of what's affecting him, but also probably because Bones is tired of listening to him. Let's not kid ourselves, this is Bones here we're talking about. But now, the captain is incapacitated, so Spock is in command, so he's going to order McCoy to let him go. So McCoy tranks him too. And I love this. I love this scene, because not only does it show just how much McCoy cares about his friends, but when he goes to leave, when he goes to sacrifice his life, you can see Jem. She feels his love for his friends, and she felt their love for him. And so as he goes with the Not-Telosians, she cries. And it's a genuinely moving scene. It's very well acted. I believe every single performance. I believe all of the emotions in this scene. It's just a shame that it takes place in an unfinished set in this goofy episode. This does, however, finally lead to us getting some answers, though. Spock, keep in mind, they still have one of those little devices from the guy they escaped from earlier. Spock manages to rewire it so that he can use it. He teleports himself and Kirk and the girl to the torture chamber so they can try to save McCoy, but he's already on the brink of death. And while Jem is right there, and they could pressure her to use her powers, even at the risk of her own life, to save Bones, they don't. They just argue over whether or not there's anything they can do for him. And just, like, Shatner's not an amazing actor, right? Everybody knows that. But man, he really sells that he's just, this is killing him. His best friend, aside from Spock, is laying there dying in front of him. There's nothing he can do, and it's killing him. There's even a shot of Spock when he meets McCoy's eyes, and you can see the emotions come through in just his eyes. Like, Nimoy, he keeps up the Spock facade, but you can see his love for McCoy, his friendship for McCoy, shine through just his eyes, and it's absolutely beautiful. And meanwhile, Jem is huddled over on the side. I would say against the wall, but there's no wall. It's an unfinished freaking set, right? But she's huddled over to the side because she's gotten to know these people, and she's an empath. She feels everything that they feel, so she wants to help, but she knows that it'll kill her. And Kirk has the idea, well, maybe she could just take enough of it to sort of stabilize him until the ship can come and rescue them, right? He doesn't want her to sacrifice herself, but he does want to try to convince her to help in a small way. But before he can do that, the Not-Telosians return and they catch him and Spock within the Bifrost. And they finally explain what's happening. They have the resources to save the population of one of the worlds that'll be destroyed by this nova, and they think it should be her people. They think it should be her population. But they need to see if these people have developed enough to have compassion. Like, they also explain it as they need to see if her instinct for compassion has grown to outstrip her instinct for self-preservation. But at one point they flat out say they need to see if she has learned compassion. Full stop. And clearly she has. And the idea that she hadn't, the idea that she didn't have the capacity for compassion, even before the trio got here, is ridiculous. Because she's literally psychically empathic. It's impossible for a species to evolve that ability without having compassion as part of it. It's very stupid. But she has. She has learned self-sacrifice. Let's say that. Let's say she has learned self-sacrifice. Because that works a lot better, frankly, from these people who are very self-sacrificing for people they care about. And so she is willing to die for McCoy. It's only because he fights her off, knocking her over gently, which causes her to fall unconscious, of course, that she doesn't. But at this point, now this is kind of f***ed over everybody. Because even though the Not-Telosians could heal McCoy with their greater knowledge of their hand doodads, they won't, because they need to see if she'll find the strength to get up and keep healing him, because they feel that for her to prove the worth of her species, she has to not just be willing to die for someone else, she has to actually give her life. Which is stupid. They're idiots. And thankfully, after Spock manages to use his brain powers to get out of the Bifrost and incapacitate them a little bit, Kirk manages to convince them of that by pointing out that they're idiots, that they've allowed their intellect to grow so much that they've forgotten the very emotions they're trying to spot in their subject, basically shaming them into saving Jem's people and McCoy, and that's the episode. And like, I've clowned on this one pretty hard, right? More so than I think any other episode of Star Trek that I've reviewed so far. But again, I want to point out, this is a perfectly watchable episode of the show. And the scenes with the trio where they're just being themselves and displaying their bond are actually really good. Like, they're really the only good part of this episode, aside from occasionally the actors who played Jem's acting. But they're still really good. My main problem with the episode really comes down to the fact that 1, it's padded to hell. 2, it looks super duper cheap. 3, it's derivative. Like, I keep calling these guys the Not-Telosians because I don't remember what they're called. Because I don't feel like there's a reason for me to remember what they're called, because they feel like they could be any of a dozen different aliens in this show. There's really nothing unique about them. And even the great interactions in this, there are other interactions just like them throughout the rest of the series. They're good and fun to watch if you like these characters and their bond, but they're really nothing special. And 4, and finally, the titular character, the Empath, is barely a character. The fact that she can't communicate with our leads, aside from them just guessing about what she's thinking and feeling, means that even though the actress does a perfectly fine job with what she's given, with that, I think, intended silent strength coming through, occasionally at least, she ends up feeling like more of an object than a character. Like, the climax of the episode is Kirk giving a speech to the bad guys, while she lays unconscious on the floor, unable to contribute in any way whatsoever. And the very, very end of the episode, which I didn't talk about yet, has Scotty likening her to a literal object, the pearl of great price from an old story. Is it a biblical story? I don't remember exactly. But I remember I had heard it when he started talking about it. It doesn't matter, but it's a literal object, and he likens her to it. Like, this show isn't super respectful anyway to female characters. Like, you hear some stories. Like, for example, the miniskirt uniforms that the women wear on the ship apparently came from a suggestion from... oh shoot, what's her name? The woman who played Yeoman Rand. Because even though they seem kind of male-gazy now, at the time, they were sort of a hip fashion for young women who were finding empowerment for the first time. They were empowering, and the idea that they might be incorporated into a uniform in the future felt futuristic and progressive, rather, at the time. Gotta love that stutter, man. And Gene Roddenberry agreed, and that's a cool thing within the context of the time. But within the context of the show itself, the show isn't great in its treatment of women, and behind the scenes during the run of the show, it wasn't always great with its treatment of women. And so, well, again, I do feel like I get what they were going for with this character. I just don't feel like it works. It just feels like Star Trek being Star Trek about women. And it doesn't help that it comes 1 week before Alon of Troyes, an episode which, like, there are some defenses you could raise against it, but, like, it's very misogynistic. I don't like it. I'm dreading when eventually the Star Trek randomizer pulls it up. Now, with my luck, that's going to be the next episode I have to talk about. I don't know. I don't hate this one. And I know some fans, while some fans hate it, others are pretty fond of it. So, like, especially if you like the bond between the trio, and you haven't seen this episode, like, I'd recommend it. But while it's watchable, I think it's also one you could pass on if that's not something you super duper care about. All of that said, though, guys, what do you think of the original series Star Trek episode, The Empath, if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description, which brings us to my favorite part of the review. Hopefully I don't get a lot of Troyes when I do this, but let's go to the Star Trek randomizer and see what we're going to be talking about next time. And click.
Sisko embarks on a mythical voyage.
According to legend, the ancient Bajorans used ships like these to explore their star system.
Of danger.
I'm not sure this design is space-worthy.
And discovery.
We'll make a sailor out of you yet.
But will his journey into the unknown
Where did we end up?
Could be light years off course.
lead him into disaster on the next Star Trek Deep Space Nine?
Okay. That could be fun.